It's a real pleasure to have Dr. William Stearman as our speaker for us this evening. Before I tell you a little bit about him, I'd like to introduce his fine wife. Joan, would you stand so people know who you are? Thank you. It's actually Bill has been to the Stearman fly-in before. He attended one of the very early fly-ins, somewhere back in the very early to maybe middle 1970s, and came here to Galesburg and participated in the fly-in, and it's been many years since he's back, so it's really a pleasure to have him back. He's not completely unfamiliar with us and with our activities in the field, so it's a grand time to have him here. I would like to say a few things and tell you just a little bit about him before he comes up and talks a little bit for you. Of course, Bill is the son of Lloyd Stearman, and he's led a very active life dedicated to the service of our country. And as a small boy growing up in the Stearman family, he was introduced to many of the very famous aviation pioneers of those days, at many of the luminary personalities that were involved in aviation in the 20s and the 30s. And this was done primarily through his association of his mom and his dad with these great aviation pioneers who had come to the factory and often spent time at their house and at their home, and would eat dinner with them and that sort of thing. And he's told me several times about some of the famous guys and gals that visited that are famous in the aviation world. As he grew up, he was among the people that was in the right age that when World War II erupted and it spread, that he was of the age that he went into service. He spent World War II as a naval officer, and most of the time he was in the Pacific fighting against the Japanese, and he was a officer on board the USS LSM number 67. I don't know if you know what an LSM is. I didn't really know until I read his book, and it stood for a landing ship medium. And if you've done any study and all, you probably are aware of what an LST was. Well, an LSM was like an LSM, except the LSM was smaller. And anyway, during his time in the Navy on board that ship, he participated in many of extended combat operations in the Pacific. His ship was in the initial assault wave on 9 assaults on 9 different islands in the Pacific, and they were also scheduled to be in the initial assault landing wave in the potential invasion of Japan, which fortunately did not occur after the atomic bomb was dropped. And I think Bill has mentioned to me several times that President Truman saved his life. But anyway, after the war was over, and at the end of the war, he ended up becoming the captain of his ship that he was served on, and he ended up as serving as captain and brought the ship back to the States, where it eventually was decommissioned. And at that time, he was among the very youngest of naval officers who served as a commanding officer on a naval vessel during that time. And after that, he became a diplomat, and he worked in the Foreign Service as a Foreign Service officer, and he served in Europe, and he had operations that were involved behind the Soviet Iron Curtain, and he worked all over there during the Cold War, negotiated various and sundry items with the representatives of the Soviet Union, and he spent a total of about 9 years stationed in both Berlin and Vienna. And later on, during the Vietnam War era, he was the director of psychological operations against North Vietnam. And he spent some time in South Vietnam working on that, and was instrumental in some of our efforts to conduct the war up north. In total, he later on after that, he went to, as a service officer, he spent 17 years as a staff member working on the National Security Council, and he worked very closely with 4 different presidents over that period of time, and that included Presidents Nixon, President Ford, President Ronald Reagan, and President George Bush the first. And so anyway, he's worked in very high circles within our government. And after he left the service on the National Security Council and the White House, he taught at the University of the Georgetown University in their School of Foreign Service, and he became the adjunct professor of international affairs. And at the time, he also was the director of the Russian Area Studies program. So, as you can see from that little brief scenario, he's had a very varied and very exciting life, and has done a lot of great service on the behalf of all the citizens of our country. He recently has just authored a book. It's a memoir of his life, both as an individual citizen and as a professional. And the title of the book is An American Adventure from Early Aviation Through 3 Wars to the White House. And it's a very interesting read. It's a good read. You'll find a lot of good information in there. He's not at all objective. He'll tell you what he thinks. And sometimes it's not always politically correct. And it's really interesting and a real blessing to read something like that every once in a while. So if you get a chance, purchase his book and read it. You'll enjoy it. It's published by the Naval Institute Press. It's available on Amazon or in some bookstores. And, oh yeah, there's another reason it would be really good for you guys to buy this book. My picture's in it. There's a nice picture in there, Bill and I standing alongside good old yellow number 17 out there, just about in the same area the grass is parked right now, many years ago. So anyway, it was a real pleasure to see that. So anyway, I would like to introduce our guest tonight, Dr. Bill Stearman, who will give us a little bit of a talk about his early life and some aspects about his father and the early designs of airplanes. And after he's finished, he says he'd be glad to answer any questions you may wish to pose. And if there's any of you who happen to have a copy of his book, he'll be glad to autograph it for you. Thank you. Bill.
Thank you very much, Tom, for this very detailed and generous introduction. Tom and Nancy Lowe and the Stearman family go way back. They've been very close friends of us. My mother and father both very fond of them, and so am I. And you'll get a kick out of this picture of Tom and me back when we were a couple of kids here at the play. You will recognize, I think, both of us. At least you'll recognize Tom in that picture. Well, I'm quite honored tonight to be here, and fortunately, the family has long been well represented here by my sister Marilyn Carr. And I always appreciate that Marilyn shows up and represents us every year, but it's high time I got back here, and Tom's very generous invitation for me to speak tonight was certainly a powerful incentive, and I'm just delighted to be here with all your fine bunch of Stearman flyers. Well, I'd like to recognize, of course, a few people. Of course, Ken McCulloch, who's the head of the Stearman Restorers Association, which we all always long held in high regard. Of course, Tom and Nancy Lowe, and Diane Stickle, who has done a great job providing the volunteer services, and we very much appreciate all of the help and support we've got from the volunteers. Bless their hearts. You're fortunate that they get such good people to volunteer and help you all. Now, there are a few points that